Hey guys, it's been a while. Happy Valentine's Day. Maybe. I mean, this is going to come out past Valentine's Day, but hopefully still in February. I have been super busy and inadvertently decided to take January off, and now I'm, this far through February, and I was still working on this video. But I'm super excited to be back doing this. I felt like I really needed to create something lately, and I always love making videos. This is going to be a little bit more of a traditional video for me, if that's such a thing, where I'm just kind of going to be waxing about why I love a particular movie and why it means so much to me, especially given our current environment right now. Everyone's talking about Luca Guadagnino lately. Challengers was a smash hit. Queer came out, and I think some people watched it. I did. I watched it. I thought it was good. Before this, Guadagnino was making a name for himself in pop culture via the now readily known Call Me By Your Name, helping push the career of one of the most popular up-and-coming actors, Timothée Chalamet, and one of the least popular falling actors, Armie Hammer. Between this and his Suspiria remake, his HBO TV show, and 3 hot people playing tennis, he released one of the most impactful movies of recent years, and my favorite movie of his. It's not exactly unpopular, a lot of people watched it, but for many it seemed to have slipped away as fast as it came, and that's almost a little poetic if you think about it. This time we're talking about Luca Guadagnino's 8th feature narrative film, Bones and All. Close your eyes for me. I've asked you to do this a couple times before on my channel. By closing our eyes, we can think more, imagine more, maybe even dream more. This time I want you to remember a half-forgotten feeling, a smell, a sound, an image you call home. Not the people, not a building, but a place. Roads stretching beyond streetlights, the smell of grass and dirt, of gasoline, the noise of crickets and cicadas, or cars and sirens. How the place breathed void of people. The corners you always wanted to explore. Everyone is probably imagining someplace different. The intimacy in which we can know a place, even a half-remembered feeling of a place, varies so much on our personal experiences. But for me, I know exactly what that feels like. Partially because I lived where I've always lived, but the memory of place, that feeling you may or may not have felt, is intoxicating to my imagination, to my spirit, really. The feeling of a place, a lonely feeling. Not a sad kind of lonely, but the kind of lonely that poems are written about, which painters try to capture, and what I think Bones and All perfectly captures. Maybe I've already lost you, but in this video I want to explore what this feeling is, why I think the movie captures it, and what that means both for the themes of the movie and the themes of life lately. It's gonna be pretentious as heck, but it already has been. I just had to do the whole eyes closed thing, and it's been a while since I've written really pretentiously about a film I love. To understand the way this film uses space and location, we first need to look briefly at the narrative structure of the events of the film to understand why it's so important to what the film is actually doing. The film follows Taylor Russell's Marin, who is established in the opening to be a compulsive cannibal, or eater. She attacks and eats a girl's finger at a sleepover, and her dad helps her hide it, as it's implied he's done many times, and they flee. But this time, the dad decides that he can't stay with her anymore and keep doing this. He leaves her with nothing more than some money and a tape explaining her early childhood, which she has mostly forgotten about, and about her mother, who Marin didn't know anything about. This starts Maren on her odyssey, both to find her mother, who she finds out may still be alive, and to find out more about herself and why she is the way that she is. The first character they meet on this journey is Marl Rylance's Sully, a creepy old man who identifies her as a cannibal purely by smell, and lays down kind of a foundation of the rules of this world's compulsive cannibals, while showing Maren kindness and sharing in a meal together of a woman who dies of natural causes. Sully identifies with his nose. The acute sense of smell to identify stuff is part of the nature of eaters, again, as they refer to themselves. But by being super pedophile vibe creepy, Sully scares Maren away, continuing her journey until she runs into Timothée Chalamet's Lee.
Hey! You're out of control, buddy.
Another eater who defends a woman being harassed and then eats the guy and steals his stuff. This impresses Maren, and they end up getting to know each other and continue to travel together. Eventually, they arrive at a romance as they meet up with Lee's family and his sister on their way to find Maren's mom. Lee can't stay home because he's the #1 suspect in the mysterious disappearance of his abusive father, and his sister always wishes he would stay around. They leave as Maren follows the lead for her mom, struggling with their condition and with each other, as Maren wants to eat people as ethically as she can, for as funny as that sounds, and they run into even more eaters with different morals and rules to what they will and won't do. After killing and eating a man with a wife and kid by accident, their relationship is at a breaking point, and they finally get to where Maren's mom used to live. They learn from Maren's mom's adoptive mom, wow, what a sentence, that Maren's mom was much the same as her and is in fact still alive, but checked herself into a mental hospital. When they get to the hospital, they find that she's eaten her own hands off and that she doesn't want Maren to live the life that she's lived, and she tries to kill Maren for that. This is the breaking point for Maren, and she leaves Lee and tries to find out who she can be on her own. After soul-searching and finding Lee's sister, she learns what really happened with Lee's father and returns to Lee, where they can fully be honest with each other and be fully in love with each other, accepting who they are, accepting that they have no home unless they make one. They settle down and for a brief moment just get to be people, happy and in love. But Sully, who we found out earlier was following Maren this whole time, shows up and tries to kill Lee when he comes home. They kill Sully, but not without Lee getting stabbed so badly he bleeds out. He begs Maren to eat him, bones and all, something that was set up earlier. The music swells and we see shots of the apartment as we leave the perspective of our characters. The blood on the floor, the door, quickly flashing through the room, framed in simplistic symmetry. We fade back into the time they were together and truly happy, and then we fade out for the last time. It's a really hard movie to crack, especially that ending. The entire thing plays out as really a romance drama with some thriller elements, so to end it in such a tragic way really pushed a lot of people's buttons, and they didn't know how to feel about the movie. And I mean, I didn't really know how I felt about the movie when I first finished it, other than the fact that it really fascinated me. I knew what it made me feel, and that, strangely enough, was hope and love in the face of such tragedy, but really beyond some of its more tangible themes, which we'll get to later. What stood out to me is I knew what this movie felt like on a far deeper level than most movies. As I said, I know what this movie smells like, what the sun or the clouds or the breeze feel like in the movie, what the wood of their apartment smells like. It feels like home. But why? Part of this can be attributed to the dreamy cinematography of Arseny Khachaturian, who worked with Guadagnino on his Christmas film O Night Divine, paired of course with Luca's direction and ideas for this film, as its imagery is still very evocative of Luca's other films without Arseny, like Call Me By Your Name, Suspiria, and Queer. But here, the simplicity and natural ease with which the camera and the light are captured really accentuate the story in a much different way from the previous films with frequent Guadagnino collaborator Mukdeepram. Sorry about the name pronunciation, I have no idea if this is right. Those films still use very natural light and the still images that bring sharpness to Bones and All, but they focus much more on the harsh contrasts at play in the frames. Queer and Suspiria especially can excel with this style, as they're kind of horror movie adjacent or just a straight horror movie. Even in Call Me By Your Name, the cinematography is often used to separate our characters harshly for various thematic reasons, painting them as outsiders in the beautiful landscape. But here, while Bones and All also follows outsiders, it follows outsiders whose only home is outside, who carefully craft their steps, who know other eaters, and whose brief moments of joy are those when they are in the most isolation. Not because they contrast with the world, but because they long for a world that they can't have. The world instead engulfs our characters, landing them in tight close-ups when other people are around, but blending them in seamlessly to the wide landscapes whenever they have the opportunity to indulge in them. Often the only time when this pattern is broken is at the times when the characters think they are safe, like when Marin returns to Lee and we get to see the beautiful wide of her running up to him at the park, even though they are around other people. And whenever there's an act of violence, which we'll get to later, the framing actually allows the moments of stillness in the frames, those long tracking shots of nothing that we get in the finale, to stand out from the perspective of a viewer and not of the objective framing of the movie, asking you to look and see their world as real, the places they walk, even when they're not there. The memories of being remain. And this is the key to a lot of the overall feeling of what I love about this movie. It invokes memory, nostalgia to a thing that might not have ever been, to a thing that you only know a fraction of. In this movie, the characters travel to Maryland, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and Nebraska. Most of these places are from the Midwest, and while I've traveled through them, I'm from the Southeast, and they're mostly unfamiliar to me. The foliage, the smells, and the places I know are humid, swampy places, forests, beaches, mountains, not really the wide plains and valleys of the Midwest. And yet, this movie makes me feel like they're a place I know. A place I've been to and can remember. The film plays with this idea of nostalgia for something that never was, false memory of hope in its framing, like the shots that break perspective. The film is trying with all its might to get us to remember, or maybe dream of remembering, what these characters must feel, and this plays to what the characters themselves are searching for. A home. A place, a path, a sense of normalcy that has never existed for them. Marin is on the run and has been her whole life. She doesn't know her mother, and she can't keep friends for very long. She first feels safe with Lee because he seems like someone relatively well adjusted to being an eater. He has a sister, a mother, a home, a sense of understanding and place in the world, one that Marin soon learns is as broken as hers is. As the other cannibals say around the fire, Lee is like an addict who's convinced himself that he has it under control. Convinced that he has a place. Marin searches hard for this home in her past and her mother, but this too falls through. And when they finally accept that both of them are broken, they can briefly find a place with each other, becoming more than just their marginalized status for only brief moments before that violence is brought back to them. But yet, they had a home, nevertheless. They had a place. They found a place in sweeping landscapes, and each other, and in the end, a true home where they were happy. Kind of melt into them, but yet it doesn't last. It never lasts. A copy of a copy until the original is but a distant goal. Maybe not the right goal. Copies of human beings. I would be amiss not to comment on how this film uses this comfort and this copied warmth in tandem with its violence. How could this be a comfort film for me? I mean, it's about cannibals. It's a tragedy. In fact, the violence and the framing of the film is something I've often seen this film criticized for. As I mentioned, we're put into the world where cannibals, or eaters, are a form of marginalized group, one that can't control who they are and appear naturally. They do not fit into the societal understanding of good and wrong, and therefore are not allowed to exist in society in some form, so they must occupy the outskirts as undesirables. It's not hard to use this, coming from Luca Guadagnino, a queer man who almost always has some queer elements in his film, as a stand-in for being gay. Queer YouTuber Lola Sebastian eloquently explores this in her video Hunger Hurts, Cannibals and Why We're Obsessed with Them. Please watch it, it was a huge influence for me wanting to do this video. Bones and all, despite offering a lot of subtext you could read into about queerness, the film itself is not about queerness, but instead deconstructs a taboo of film to touch on the subject of otherness in a way that asks us questions about how others in that group engage beyond all the baggage of trying to explain what that othering is, or try to justify the existence of the other. Eaters exist in this world, and their sense of taboo or other is what's important, more than the one-for-one comparison to queerness, which is something that Luca rarely dabbles in, to a lot of people's criticism. Some people still struggle with this aspect, and I really get it, but this film asks a little bit more from its viewers than a one-for-one metaphor, and I really admire, as Lola puts it, the film's impressionistic sensibilities to allow the audience to pull their own meaning from the film. So yeah, there's a lot of violence in this film, both by eaters against other eaters, and of course by eaters to other people. This is the main conflict of the film in terms of Marin's own self-conscious and struggle. She refuses to accept that they have to eat people and hurt those around them, but finds through the encounters like the man at the carnival with a family, no matter how carefully they try to be, they end up hurting some people. They can't ethically eat, in a sense. In fact, Sully is one of the only characters who seems to ethically eat, from what we can see, feeding on the almost dead. But this is also a thin truth, as it looks over the fact that her body is then destroyed and taken away from her loved ones, something that seems almost cruel as we pan over her life one photograph at a time in her bedroom. And this pent-up isolation Sully's commitment to ethical eating has brought him leads to his attachment and violence against Marin and Lee once he can't let her go. So, does this play into a film that focuses so much on the comfort and dreams of homes, of finding belonging among those like you? Well, in a sense, the violence itself is not framed in the way violence often is in movies, especially alleged horror movies. There's a clear, intimate, if not sometimes erotic tone to the violence in the film, and sometimes they take it even beyond the tone. The framing of the characters and the cinematography we've already talked about is what frames the violence of the film visually in such a unique way. Even in the opening of the movie, when Marin eats the girl's finger at the sleepover, it's not framed in a way that would invoke a horror movie, but instead the character is in an intimate closeness with the character, and the frame matches this closeness, standing at the same unmoving distance when Marin can't control herself and takes a bite. The violence from this point forward is framed as a point of intimacy whenever it's brought up. This can do two things for the audience watching the movie. It can flip the previously mentioned feeling of home that the film presents, the longing for normalcy, and give it a much darker tone, framing these people and whatever metaphor you may read them as nothing more than a horror narrative, which I think is ultimately a flawed viewpoint. Or it can challenge the viewer to question their own ideas of what is and isn't right. What would you do if you were Marin? Is what they're doing okay? And how do you navigate a world where the others of that world hurt each other? Is this world anything like ours? It's an annoyingly bad time to bring this up, given the current political sphere of the world and how bad things are looking towards the queer community, but by the nature of otherness and the nature of dividing human beings into groups via class, race, sexuality, gender, literally anything, you create a system that has some sort of judgment built into it, and that can lead to inner conflict. or sometimes in truly downtrodden groups who are just trying to survive, it can lead to such a close-knit world where bad behavior and hurt can be even hard to mention for fear of how it will reflect on the rest of the group. This in and of itself is a form of violence, but the film asks us how, within a world of this systemic violence built into the very labels in which we use to identify ourselves, how can you find home or peace? And what it offers as some semblance of an answer, because a film with this much going on would honestly be kind of cheapened if it tried to sell you one final answer, is that there isn't one. It's a bit of a pessimistic film in that way, saying that likely things won't be okay, and when they are, it may only be for a short period. A feeling I know pretty much all marginalized groups are kind of feeling right now with Trump coming into office, but that this has been something that we have survived through, and that the thought of home survives through. That in order for the marginalized to survive, we must embody that which we find as home, to hold to our most intimate of people. Marin eating Lee at the end of the film hurts because he's leaving, but it's something beautiful at the same time, because for Marin and Lee, it's an act of true love, and a sacrifice asking Marin to still be herself, to keep a part of Lee with her, to keep all of Lee with her, and pursue that home she knows is there, that they once had. Home, of course, isn't a place. As the old saying goes, home is where the heart is. And as silly as a saying that is, it taps into something socially true about home and really all parts of human intimacy. Home is a kind of intimacy. Home is a place you know well enough to relax in, to let down your guard. It is your fortress to some extent. And this is because you are intimate with it. You know what it will do and where it is. Oftentimes we will even leave our own impressions and will on what we call home, designing it to our liking. In a physical sense, arranging furniture, artwork, even TVs, making the space not only recognizable to ourselves deeply, but also as an outward expression of ourselves. But this is not the full story of what makes something home. Homes can be deeply us in terms of outward expression and even familiarity in design, but it may not always feel like home to us in a full sense. Think of your parents' house. At a certain point, despite this being the house you likely grew up in, knowing it intimately and even putting your mark on it to some extent, it may at some point not feel like the place you want to be, or even your home. The concept of home is one fully informed by our personal existence. To some extent, home is a purely social concept. It doesn't actually mean much on its own terms, and therefore it's determined by what stage of life you're at, what you imagine as home, and what society around you deems as a home. When I was at school, it took several months, but without even thinking about it at a certain point, I referred to my dorm as home, despite it being so far removed from anything that I would normally understand to be my home, not even on the same continent. Home is simply where you feel you belong. This is what makes Bones and All an interesting film to talk about, and one that I've fallen in love with every time I've seen it, because it understands what a home actually is, and what it actually means to be home. And that home, like all things, ultimately moves in cycles. These cycles are not always in our control, but they can be. And us taking actions to put them in our control, to say who we want to be our family, to say where we want our home to be, is part of us creating the world that we want to be in. I've been reading a decent bit of queer theory lately. I just finished In Transit, Being Non-Binary in a World of Dichotomies by Diane Anderson, and it was fantastic. A really great starting point to the non-binary experience that makes its more academic elements really approachable. You should check it out. But it's hard to separate lately, as I've been procrastinating writing this video, the messages that really speak to me within this film that make it such a powerful comfort movie with me, and the messages of a lot of the queer theory that I've been reading, and of course our current events. And I don't think that it's a stretch to tie this movie made by a queer man into these themes, even if not directly like I mentioned earlier. It's hard right now if you're a queer American to feel at home. It feels like over half of America just signed off the reins of our country to one of the most concerning US presidents in the history of the country, who seems hellbent on banning trans people from existing instead of trying to make life in this country more livable, who's passing control of a borderline fake new government agency to a guy so incompetent that he got laughed out of PayPal and has effectively tanked most of the companies he's bought, and who is literally backing far-right Germany. It's bad. A country who's abusing pretty much all Hispanic people with the militant use of ICE coming into schools and churches and destroying families. There's not a lot to feel at home at in our country right now. But even when things seem hopeless, they're not. We can always fight back, and people literally all over the world are. And the thing is, even in the worst state you can imagine, there are people like you. People who need a home, people who need a family, communities that have outlived any president, worlds that have been hidden because they have to be, for their safety and survival. And for all of Bones and All's weird readings you could pull from it, ones that can be dangerous and work directly against the message of the movie, it's a movie that understands that even when you feel like you're alone, and that the entire world, maybe even your parents, don't want you, there are people out there who will understand, people who will help, people like you. There may always be danger. Things may only get worse for the time being. It may even be infighting or dangerous people within our community, but in our fighting back and our protesting and in our attempts to fix local government, don't forget to let yourself be happy. To let yourself have family, friends, memories. These are the things we're fighting for. They're what make the fight meaningful. That's where you can find home. And the beautiful valleys, the tall mountains, the concrete roads, and the small apartments where you belong. Anyway, guys, do you remember the scene where with Timothy in the cornfield? That was kind of hot. It's been it's been a while since I've made a video, and it's been a little bit hectic to do since work has been so crazy, but I'm so happy to talk about this movie and a little bit of the anxieties I've had in the world today. This movie is just there to let you know it's okay to exist, and the way it does, it taps into how hard that can be for people sometimes, how hard the simple fact of existence can be for those marginalized, no matter what you tie that to. And to me, that's beautiful. So my moral here is to just exist. Be present in the world. I live in Georgia, not exactly known for its progressive stuff, and I was at the park the other day, and there were two goth lesbians having a romantic time in the field, and that's great. You know what I mean, though? You know what I mean? Stay safe. But we deserve to be visible and to exist, even in this messed up country that we always, of course, need to fight to make better. It's really hard to say this on a YouTube video because there is so much genuinely awful, heinous stuff going on in the world by our country. But hopefully this isn't too heavy for this movie. I just kind of have been feeling not at home, but remembering what home feels like is really nice, and what home can be, and maybe what home should be. I think America can be that, and hopefully it will be someday. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully I'll be back on a more consistent schedule of video production. I don't know. So much going on right now. Life is life, but I love making videos, and I really hope you guys enjoy watching this stuff. It means a lot to me, the amount of support that I've gotten so far, even though I'm still a relatively small channel. So please, if you feel it within your heart on this Valentine's Day. Like, comment, and especially subscribe. It would mean so much to me if you guys subscribed. I think like 80%, actually I think the number is bigger than that. Like 80% of most of my views are from unsubscribed people. And hey, if you're one of those people, it's not cool, man. All you gotta do is press the little button. I'm really bad about that. I never unsubscribe from anything. It's a problem. I'm subscribed to stuff that like I haven't watched in almost a decade. But like, I don't know. It's just a lot of work to unsubscribe. But it's not a lot of work to subscribe. Anyway, I love you guys. Stay safe out there. Seriously. Have a good life. Seriously. Live a good life. Enjoy what you can. Fight for what you can't.